Before I get started, you should know that I'm not easy to scare. I really enjoy horror movies, mainly because I'm always looking for the one that can make me actually feel scared, which has become harder and harder as these days with the prevalence of nothing but jump scares. My girlfriend, on the other hand, is terrified of scary movies and has tons of phobias, but she still loves going to see them, and getting scared makes her a little hot, if you know what I mean. One of her biggest fears is creepy dolls. So what do I decide to get her for a birthday present but an old porcelain doll? I figured it'll pay off, and if not, I got her a couple of other things she's been hinting at. Anyway, I'd been hunting for a doll that was appropriately creepy, but not way out of my price range. It's kind of funny how many people put up online that they have a haunted doll, just trying to squeeze some extra money out of their mom's old junk. I tried some of the major antique malls in the area and tried all the thrift stores, but no luck, until 2 days ago. I was in a different town for a doctor's appointment and found one of those old little hole-in-the-wall antique shops, the kind that can't be profitable, but they own the building so they stick around. I went out on a whim, not really even thinking about the doll idea, and started poking around. There wasn't anyone behind the counter when I walked in, so I figured it was okay just to look. There were rows and rows of shelves in that place. It almost felt like it was bigger on the inside, but that's not something that happens outside of TV. Each shelf was filled with, well, mostly junk. There were a couple of nice things, a couple of silver candlesticks, and a cool old butter churn, a pair of cavalry sabers from the Civil War, but nothing I needed to buy. And then I saw it. It was sitting on the shelf above the cracked ship's wheel and next to the jar of buttons. This doll, I looked at it and didn't think it was super creepy or anything, but for whatever reason, it had only $5 on it. Hey, why not, I reached up to get it down, and it had just begun to turn around when I heard a voice directly from behind me. "Can I help you?" It was an old woman, ancient even. She was at least 90. She was incredibly skinny, and her bones stuck out in weird ways. Her eyes were a watery gray color, behind these massive glasses. Yes, I think I'm gonna buy this doll," I said, and held it out to her. She nodded and walked slowly behind her counter and began to push the buttons on the register. It was then that I had the thought, out of curiosity, why is this thing only $5? I said, expecting her to tell me that it was moldy or something. "Oh, no reason," she said. "I just wanted to give it a good home." I shrugged and handed her the cash. As she gave me change, she looked at the doll. "Such a pretty doll," she said, stroking its head once, and then she let out a nasty, wet cough. I smiled awkwardly and said goodbye, picking the doll up. "Be careful not to drop her," she said, and as I was walking out the door, I could swear I heard her voice say something like, "See you soon." Though the way she said it, I'm sure it wasn't directed at me. The rest of the day was pretty boring, and when I got back to my house, I was ready to do the requisite amount of gaming a man in his 20s is required to do. I live way out in the middle of nowhere, in my parents' old house up in the Appalachian Mountains. They died recently. It's surrounded by woods. It's about a 30-minute drive into town. I was greeted at the door by my dog, Sarah, who, in classic dog fashion, demanded to play immediately. She was jumping up and down, happy as a dog can be, until I opened up the bag with a doll in it. Her ears immediately lowered, and she started growling at the thing. If I hadn't had quick reflexes, she would have ripped the thing right there. I hurried and ran into the bedroom and stuck it on the table before running out to calm her down, and didn't think about it for a while. That night, when I was about to turn in, I glanced at where I thought I had set the doll down and realized it wasn't there. Now, this is not as creepy as it sounds. I have a history of forgetting where I set things. Glancing around, I realized it was sitting on my bedside table, almost as if it had been posed. My reaction, as most people's would have been, was nope. I turned it over, face down on the table, and went to bed. That night, I had an incredibly vivid dream. It was one of those floaty dreams, where you just feel like you're watching someone else. It seemed to be a 1920s speakeasy. Everyone was dressed up and dancing and drinking and smoking. A man in a burly tuxedo stood watch at the door, and there was a jazz band playing on the stage. The lead singer was this really energetic, scrawny guy, dancing around as he sang. But the dream soon fixated on the couple who were on the dance floor. A young man with short black hair wearing a suit, dancing with a gorgeous woman in a gold black dress. They were all over each other, and the woman was a little more drunk. Their words really didn't seem to make much sense to me, but I did catch that her name was Missy at one point. The man went off to the restroom, and the woman sat breathlessly by the bar, and then everything went to hell. Men burst in from the front door. The bouncer pulled a gun, and the men pulled their own. There were gunshots and screaming. Everyone was running around, trying to get out of the bar, but there was only one exit. The last thing I saw before I woke up was Missy, slumping over in her seat, collapsing onto the bar. I woke up panting and covered in sweat. All my covers were down at the foot of my bed, and my pillows were strewn all over the place. I rolled over to grab my phone to look at the clock, and just about yelled. The doll had rolled next to me in the bed, her eyes fixed onto mine. It was then I realized that she was wearing the exact same dress as the woman in the dream. I'm writing this now at 4 a.m. The doll is back up on the table, facing the opposite way. I'm sure it's all in my head, but I swear when I picked her up, she was a little heavier than yesterday, and the body was a little softer. It's starting to snow outside, and there's no way I'm getting into town today. I feel like I must have pulled something while I was sleeping, because my neck and wrists were really stiff. It's hard just to move my head about without moving my whole body. My ankles are sore, but maybe it's just a cold. My grandmother was the sweetest person you could ever meet. She was the stereotypical grandmother, always giving us kids little treats and warm hugs. I used to love spending the night at her house. She would bake cookies while I played in her yard, but there was always something about her house that unnerved me. At night, I would hear things in the attic, almost like boxes being pushed around or light banging sounds. All the family heard these things when they stayed over at her house, everyone but her actually. She would never admit to hearing the sounds. Now whether she did hear them or just played it off as a huge debate to my family. But one thing was for sure, she would never let anyone go up into the attic to investigate. My poor grandma passed away a few weeks ago, and in the process of cleaning up her house, we finally decided to see what was in that attic. It was cold up there, as a lack of insulation in the cold early May weather would do to any room. As far as any one of us could see, there was just a bunch of old boxes in the corner of the room. My dad did a sweep, looking for signs of squirrels or other rodents that could be scurrying around, but found no sign of anything living up there. Finally, we brought the boxes down and looked at them. The boxes were filled with old dolls. They were old handmade cloth dolls that mothers gave to their daughters to play with back in the turn of the century. We were all kind of disappointed, as we expected it to be some family treasure that my grandma was hiding. We put all the dolls back into the boxes and loaded them up into the truck. As I was the only one close to the house with any sort of storage space, I decided all the stuff would go into my basement until we could sell or donate it, or just try to get rid of everything. So we drove over to my house and unloaded the truck. That night, I couldn't sleep. This is nothing out of the ordinary, as many nights I can't sleep actually. I decided to go into the kitchen for a midnight snack. Food in the belly always helps knock me out. I slowly make my way downstairs into the kitchen, but stop before I flip on the kitchen light. I could hear faintly, but clear as day, scuffling noises coming from the basement. Now, there's only one way to get into the basement, and that is a doorway in the kitchen. I think something got in through the windows and go down to have a look. I open the door and slowly make my way down, trying not to spook whatever was making the noise. I I reach the bottom and feel for a light switch. I flip on the light switch and try to hold back a scream. All the dolls have been taken out of the boxes and set up in a circle on the floor. I look around and see something move behind a box. I quickly kick the box aside and see one of the dolls sitting there. I lean in and pick it up, looking at the strange thing. It was made out of simple white cloth with orange yarn for hair, black buttons for eyes, and painted on a smile that had faded into a twisted pink line. As I looked at the doll, the light bulb overhead suddenly went out. I quickly made my way up the stairs, which thankfully still had lights from the kitchen coming down, when I felt something pinch my hand. I dropped the doll out of reflex and run upstairs, turning around just in time to see the doll disappear into the cover of darkness. I stood in the kitchen for a while, trying to figure out what had happened. I told myself that maybe my daughter had gotten into the box and set up the dolls. I was half asleep, and I got freaked out when the lights went out. I hit my hand on something while I was running, and I threw the doll. And when I turned around, it was sliding on the smooth tile floor. I decided it was time to go to bed and went back upstairs. The next morning, I asked my daughter about the dolls at breakfast, but she didn't know anything about them. I passed it off and continued on getting ready for work. I was all ready to go, and the last thing to put on was my watch, but it wasn't on the dresser like normal. I looked all around and couldn't find the thing. I decided to ignore it and look for it later when I got home. I got a call at work from my wife later that day, saying that she had found my watch, but it was in the basement next to this creepy doll. My blood ran cold when I heard that. I admitted I had no idea how it could have gotten down there, not daring to tell her what had happened the night before. I decided to stay up that night to see if I could catch the doll moving again. I got up around 11, telling my half-awake wife I was going to get a drink in the kitchen, something she was used to by that point, and to go back to sleep. I went down and sat at the table, watching the door all night for any sign of activity. Finally, at around 2 o'clock, I heard a thud at the door and watched as it slowly opened. I didn't turn the light on, but it was the same doll from the night before. I watched, wide-eyed, almost shitting myself, as it walked out of the door into the hall. I quickly grabbed the thing, taking it by surprise, and ran out back to the grill. The thing was shockingly strong, and it was all I could do to keep my grip on it as I reached into my back pocket to grab my lighter. I quickly sparked a flame and brought it to the thing, instantly catching it on fire. I lifted up the lid of the grill and threw the thing in. I waited and watched as smoke poured out of the top. Then, in the silence of the night, I heard it, a deep, almost demonic laugh coming from the grill. I backed away, never taking my eyes off of it. The laughing began to get louder, echoing inside of the metal grill. I stood there, frozen for what seemed like hours, till it finally stopped. I walked over and lifted up the lid. Nothing was left but a small pile of ash, and very oddly, some teeth. I put the lid back on and made my way upstairs. I didn't get any sleep that day and decided to just call off work. I sat around watching TV and finally fell asleep on the couch. When I woke up, the first thing that I heard was static coming from the TV. I turned around. All of them were just looking at me and watching me. I jumped up and ran to the door, but as I reached for the knob, I stopped. There, sitting on the front door, was the doll I had burned last night. Not a scorch mark or anything on it. I ran out of that house as fast as I could, hearing just faintly the same laughing behind me. I decided to keep the basement door locked from now on. I told my family it was because there was a lot of expensive things I didn't want to get broken. They didn't ask too many questions. After all, no one ever went into the basement before. I've never told anyone that story, or that at night, when I go to get a drink or a midnight snack from the kitchen, I can hear them downstairs, moving stuff around, knocking at the door trying to get out, and every once in a while, I hear a laugh. My grandmother used to crochet dresses for dolls or babies. We had this porcelain doll that she had made a beautiful white dress for, and my mom put it in my room for decoration. Now, I didn't mind it at first because it reminded me of my grandmother, whom I love very much. When I was 8, my half-sister was living with us, and her and I would stay up and talk at the time. One night, we were, as per usual, talking. It was about 11 o'clock. The way our beds were set up, I had to look to my left to see her, and she had to look to her right. The doll was on the cabinet in front of us, so we could see it out of the corners of our eyes. So we were laying there, talking about music, when all of a sudden, we both see something move out of the corners of our eyes. We both whipped our heads towards the doll, not noticing anything odd, just the doll staring straight ahead like always. We shrug it off and go back to talking. A few minutes later, we see movement again, and at this time, we see a difference. The doll's head is facing towards my sister's. We were frozen in fear for a good 30 seconds. I start shaking and ask my sister if she saw what I saw. Stuttering like crazy, all she could do was nod. Still being scared, we refused to move. Then the doll's head whipped towards me. While we were staring at it, needless to say, we booked it out of there and sat in the living room for a good hour or so. Then I got up the courage to go back in, my sister following farther behind. I creep in, and the doll's head is back to normal. I tiptoe past it to grab a blanket to throw over the doll. I stand in front of it, my whole body trembling, and quickly throw the blanket over the now terrifying thing. I automatically felt the air in the room get lighter, and I heaved a big sigh. I thought everything was okay, so I hopped back into bed. My sister thought I was crazy, but eventually she joined me back in our room. The next morning, we woke up to see the blanket on the ground and the doll leaning as far forward as possible, arms outstretched towards us, and its head was facing me. We screamed, and our parents came rushing in. They asked what was wrong, and through hysterical tears, we explained what had happened last night and what happened when we woke up too. My mom, the skeptic that she is, told us that we were dreaming, and our dad, on the other hand, well, he moved the doll out of our room for a while until my mom put it back. It was out of our room for a good month, and my sister and I noticed the difference right away. But as soon as that thing was back, we didn't like our room. The air felt heavy, and it was always colder in there. We moved out of that apartment and into a house on my uncle's land, but my mom still has that doll. I don't know where she put it, but just so long as it's not in my room, I don't care where it is. I'd like to remember it how I used to, as a memory of my grandmother who passed away when I was in the 5th grade, but I get goosebumps and even get scared every time I think of that damn thing.